Good afternoon and welcome to the School of Communications Communication Careers Week event. I'm Susan Napoleon. This week we are hosting several panel discussions with professionals representing a variety of industries who will provide some great tips and insights on career development. And we are very happy that you have joined us here today. And now I'd like to introduce to you our panel moderator, Chair of the Electronic and Photographic Media Department, Chris Sagovac. Good morning, Chris.
Morning. Thanks, Susan. Excited to be here today. So let's get right to it. With us today, we have Carl Reed, President at Lion Forge Animation.
Hello.
We have David Johnson, President at Cool Fire Studios.
What's up, guys?
We have Gary Harrelson, Multimedia Director for Photography, Video, and Podcasting for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch.
Hey, gang.
We have Brandon Booker, Software Engineer for Castle Hill Gaming.
Hello.
And Connor Brown, Level Designer for Santa Monica Studio.
Good.
Today, myself and the panel will be covering career launch, networking, professional organizations and development, interviewing, portfolio, and philosophy. And of course, if we do jump down some interesting rabbit holes, we'll do that, and then I'll pivot us back accordingly. So I'd like to start out with general question across the board, or general question, but also a bit biographical information about each of you. Can you tell us a bit about yourselves, your work, your path to your current career, and expand upon how students might be able to launch their careers today? I mean, it's definitely going to be different in comparison to how you've all made it. But let's talk about some of those things. Would anyone like to go first?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Just going to reintroduce myself again. My name is Connor Brown. I'm a level designer at Santa Monica Studio. And I think a lot of the pathway to starting your career today, just for me and a lot of people in game design, you can do a lot of the same networking and type of building your portfolio up the same way you can do it as if you were, just out and about without the COVID going on. So I started at a smaller company called Pixel Press in St. Louis, Missouri. And then I moved out here to Los Angeles to work at Naughty Dog. I worked on Last of Us Part 2 as a level designer. And now I'm working on the next God of War installment at Santa Monica Studio. And just working through COVID, especially, having these work at home times, everybody, still figuring stuff out. It's still, it feels new for us every month, still trying to figure things out. But it's not to say that, new difficulties with trying to build your career has started, but maybe new opportunities have also started too. So working from home, building your portfolio, you can still do all that from home. And then connecting with anybody you can in the industry or maybe the path that you're trying to go. It still works the same way. So working on personal projects, sharing your stuff online, making sure you're a part of groups where people who are in the industry can see your stuff are very important. And just getting your name out there and not trying to necessarily push your stuff on other people in the industry, but making it aware to everybody out there. So publishing your stuff on all media platforms, building a social presence, especially now. Even I was never somebody who liked, Twitter or sharing stuff online, but especially now, you can use that as a gateway to help you get opportunities and for people to see your stuff. So what I do, I use Twitter and Instagram, not for, kind of what they're built for, talking to other people, but just sharing my art and my portfolio and using that as just my foundation for sharing everything else. So yeah, that's my input there with that.
Okay, thanks, Connor. Who'd like to go next?
No, I can go next. I had a kind of weird route to my career. Started off as a comic book artist in my teens and did that through school. Once I graduated from school, we started an agency to expand. Me and a couple of friends who were also comic book artists. We started an agency to while we were in between comic jobs or while the work being a freelancer is sporadic, we would do any and everything from websites to apps to animation to whatever people wanted. And so we kind of had to learn from the ground up. And so I didn't have a formal art education, but it then took 10 years for me to to go on and work in broadcast animation. So there's a more straightforward path through the traditional education system. So in the mid 2000s, went out to LA and worked in broadcast animation. And then some years later, I had a kid and decided to move back to the Midwest. And we started Lion Forge Comics. And kind of the focus of that was, different voices and adding some diversity to comics, both in genre and the people that's producing it. And then throughout the years, we've been kind of building our publishing side. And then just recently in 2018, we officially started our animation side where we produce content for TV and film. One of the most notable is Hair Love, which we won an Academy Award for this year. So that's pretty neat. But we have a lot more things in the queue coming. And really what I would suggest now more and more is that when you are out in the world and working freelance, more and more the desire is when we search for talent, we look for specific skills. And so if you specialize, then you can get better in those specific areas. Every once in a while, you'll find that unicorn that can do everything and they're very valuable. So I wouldn't necessarily abandon all of your skills, but if you become very good at storyboarding or whatever that writing or character design, I would focus on your strength while you're building up the rest. And then, like Connor said, online publishing your work, doing web comics or publishing images on your social media is usually how you get found nowadays, keeping up with your LinkedIn. And then also attending Comic-Cons and conventions and basically being social in the world of COVID. It's a little more difficult, but I think we have not necessarily missed a beat because everybody's online even more, and so you can get more FaceTime with people actually than before.
I'll
So
go next.
Gary, okay, go ahead.
Sorry. My name is Brandon Booker. I go by Booker. I've been a game programmer for the past 15 years professionally. I started out making kind of advert games, Flash web browser games, and kind of bounced around with a lot of small companies doing that. Now I work for a company that makes slot machine games. We have thousands of slot machines across the United States, making hundreds of thousands of dollars a day, none of which I see. But I'm not bitter about that. This is a little bit harder when you don't get to hear people laughing, but that's okay. I'll just assume people were laughing. But on the side, I work for a small indie company called Zojoy. We have games on all the major platforms. I just kind of wanted to add to what both Carl and Connor said, because I think they were very strong points, and that's why I wanted to jump in here, especially about the specialization. And I think that's one of the things that having gone through a degree in programming that was geared specifically towards game development, you get a taste of everything, but you don't get to drill into one thing specifically. And the thing about this industry, and maybe yours as well, is you're hiring to solve a problem. You're not hiring somebody because you like them. You have a specific problem that you need to solve, and you're looking for someone who can solve that problem. And that problem is going to be a very, very specific thing. And, for instance, I had a conversation with a guy that I met on Reddit who was asking basically the same question: how do I get into the industry? And I was telling him you need to specialize, and he's like, well, what do you mean? Do you mean mobile games? And I'm like, no, I mean metrics gathering systems. If the job is in mobile games, take take that as the starting point and then drill down deeper into metrics gathering, into advertising systems, into monitoring player behavior systems, like something really, really, really specific. And if you can nail that, which is easy to do, relatively speaking, right? Because if you're not presented with this nebulous, huge thing of I just want to master Unity, you're never going to master Unity, right? I'm the lead Unity developer on like several games that are on Switch and stuff, but like I don't know everything about Unity. I absolutely do not. And but I know a lot about this one thing in Unity, and that's the thing that's going to get you the job. So that's key point number one. Key point number two, which has already been said, is contacts are your currency. Not every job you will get because you know somebody, but every person I've ever worked with has gotten at least one job because he knew somebody at the place, or he's friends with somebody, or he used to work with somebody. You've got to meet people, even the people around you that you work with right now, or that you're going to school with right now, can be the currency that's going to get you employed in the future. So be a fun guy to hang out with, be a fun person, try not to be as awkward as you might really be in real life.
And don't get COVID, right?
And don't get COVID. That's always a bad thing. All right, so that's it for me.
Okay.
So I'm Gary Harrelson, the multimedia director at the Post-Dispatch. So it's kind of funny because when I was a kid, I wanted to be an astronaut. I wanted to be a mortician, believe it or not. I wanted to be a state trooper. And, as I got through like middle school and in the early high school, I realized that I didn't want to be any of those. And so for me, it was a graphics arts class that I took that basically gave me my shot in the arm to become a journalist, a photojournalist. And that first time that I ever actually developed film back in the day, if you know what film is, I washed it in 120-degree water and the emulsion slid off, and that's what hooked me. So, but ever since then, it's been an uphill battle for me. I worked at Wendy's, bought my first camera, and I've done nothing but some form of photography or videography since then. I've been at the Post-Dispatch for 21 years here now, and I've been the zone's picture editor, where I oversaw about 8 different zone sections that we went out into our communities back in the early 2000s. I've been the assistant photo director. I've been the assignments editor. I was video director for a while, and just in the last 3 years or so, I became the multimedia director over all of that stuff. So for me, it was a little bit of a hard path at the beginning because I didn't really want to give up shooting, but back in the day when even now, so there weren't that many minority voices in this industry in journalism, and that's one of the things that kind of prompted me to jump into management a lot earlier than most people want to get into it. So it was either I could shoot or become a department head or become a manager, and I decided to just jump into that and not look back. As far as students, probably one of the biggest things I would probably say, I do work with a lot of high school students and college students. And I think the biggest thing that I see that they don't take advantage of is networking and just reaching out to professionals to get feedback on your work and stuff like that. So that's probably one of the biggest things that I would suggest that students today do is reach out, find some mentors and stay in touch with people, because I give out cards and I tell students, give me a call, if I don't answer, email me again, and that kind of stuff. And sometimes students will do that. Sometimes they won't. Carl, you mentioned something about a unicorn. And I think that's funny because I think now the way the industry has evolved now, it's like, journalists have to be a little bit of everything these days. You've got to be a little bit of a photographer. You've got to be a writer. You've got to know video, and even podcasting these days too. So, the industry's changed a lot. Back in the day when I was getting into this, back in the early 80s, mid 80s or so, I spent a lot of my time out just cruising neighborhoods looking for, feature photos and stuff like that, but, now it's much more defined, and we do a lot of different things, a lot of different things now. The other thing also too is internships, especially in this industry. If you wait until you're a senior to get an internship, you're behind. You should be thinking about that as soon as as you're a freshman or a sophomore or whatever. At least just the experience of applying for internships is very helpful as well, even if you don't get it. But follow back up with those editors and figure out like what you could have done to made you more marketable to them. And then the networking thing, as I mentioned earlier, too, is very, very important. Sometimes it is who you know. I do stay in touch with a lot of students. And the other thing I was going to mention, too, is about your social media presence. I troll a lot of students on social media. I've hired interns before by approaching them, not necessarily them applying for me for my internship here. So, the stuff that you put out there on social media is going to reflect what you do. And we can talk a little bit more about that later, because sometimes that's good and bad. So that's kind of my journalism career path in a nutshell. And we can get into a little bit more of this a bit later.
Sounds good. I guess that makes me last, and I'll try to be brief with this, but it's nice to have everybody's perspectives already so I can figure out kind of what ground needs to be covered. But again, I'm David Johnson. I'm the president and executive producer at Cool Fire Studios. We're a full service production company here in St. Louis that produces commercials, branded entertainment, original entertainment we got into about 10 years ago. And we've got a new vertical that's focused on audience development and social video strategy. So how I got here is an interesting path. I did go to school here in Missouri. I was, born and raised in a small town here in Missouri. I had no idea film was a career. I didn't even in college. I was trying to study advertising. I moved to Houston, Texas after college, which was a long time ago, 1994. But I got an advertising job and realized that maybe advertising wasn't for me. And so I ended up selling clothes at Banana Republic after college, questioning all of my decisions. But I got lucky one day. I met this guy who was a director of commercials, and I was selling a bunch of shirts and asking him a bunch of questions. And he said, "Hey, if you're that interested in it, you should come out and be a PA." And so I said, "Great, what is that?" He goes, "Well, it's production assistant." I said, "Awesome, what do you do?" I said, "Somebody needs a Coke, you go get it." It's like, dude, I can totally do that job. So I went out there, and my first shoot was for Academy Sporting Goods. It was in middle of the summer. They were shooting a hunting commercial. So it was like 107 degrees, but there was lights up, there was dolly tracks, there was cameras. We were still shooting film. I was just blown away. I was going around asking all the crew members what they did. It's like, "You're a gaffer. What do you do? You're a key grip. What do you do?" And so I drove everybody crazy on that shoot, but they liked having me around, and I started working full time. It turned out it was the top production company in Houston. I got hired on as a production coordinator, and then that's when my schooling went to work. I mean, I would stay till midnight teaching myself how to edit, do graphics, audio, run the cameras. I had zero social life, but I was having fun. I started going to the South by Southwest Film Festival a couple years later and got the feature film bug. And then 3 years later, I was already producing national commercials for Walmart, Nations Bank, Texaco, but I wanted to go out and try film. So I started over at about 27 or 28 years old in Los Angeles, took internships for no money. But before I went out there, a note that's been hit here pretty hard is I networked like crazy. And this was before, texting and a bunch of that stuff. I mean, I was calling people old school on phones, and I called everybody I knew that lived in LA. And it didn't matter if they were in the business or not. I met with plumbers, accountants, but everybody knew somebody in the entertainment industry. So by the time I worked out there, I was actually working the very next day on a commercial and getting paid. And so for the first year, I started just trying to do anything I could to keep ends meet, but I wanted to do feature film. So I started out at Outlaw Productions and Development, reading scripts. The first script they gave me was for Training Day. I did not know that. They were already in production on it. I passed on it. I told them I'd already seen the movie Colors and just totally eviscerated the script. But they said they liked my honesty and they didn't want anybody who was just going to pass along a bunch of bad scripts to the development execs. So they kept me along. But about a year later, I went to work for a smaller production company. It was a couple of brothers, Mike Binder and Jack Binder. And Mike was a writer, director, actor. He did Blank Man, Indian Summer, Crossing the Bridge, a bunch of other films. But they were already in London shooting a film, and they needed a guy to run the LA office. And so they just threw me to the wolves, which quite frankly was the best thing that could ever happen to me. I mean, I went into work at 7 or 8 in the morning, scared shitless. And the next day by 5 o'clock, I knew how to sell a film to Germany, or I knew how to take a meeting at HBO. And so I got very lucky, but I also had to take some chances, which is another piece of advice I would offer is, don't be afraid to step in. And if you've got questions, ask them. I produced 2 films with those guys. We had one with Colin Firth and Mariel Hemingway, another independent film with Janine Garofalo and Alan Rickman. While the boys were in London, I was taking meetings at HBO with the head of HBO and Mike on the speakerphone, and I'm sitting there taking notes. So that's an awesome experience that, most guys like me don't get. But we got 2 seasons actually greenlit of The Mind of the Married Man. I stayed on for a season of that, and then I decided I wanted to start my own company. So I met this other writer director, and we raised some money, and we made 0 films in 4 years. So I learned what failure was like. But I also made some great contacts through that. I mean, one of the guys I had interning for me reading scripts at my little production company is now the CEO of Funny or Die. So, and he's somebody I can email and talk to right now. I've sent 3 people from Coolfire to go out there and work for him. You know, like Carl, I met my wife to be and wanted to move back to the Midwest and be a little closer to family. But I went to Coolfire in 2005. I was employee number 6. I had this variety of skills. I sort of had to kind of rebrand and remarket myself because they weren't making movies here, weren't making TV shows here. But I had a bunch of buddies that went to the J school at Mizzou, and they were at all these ad agencies, and Coolfire was not doing any real production at the time. It was really more post-production. And so it was my job to go out there and sell, and whatever I sold, I would make. And so, you know, through the years, I started to develop our book of business, slowly got promoted. Within 3 years, I was made vice president. Another 4 years, I was president and had equity in the company. And I've been very fortunate that Jeff Keane, the founder of Coolfire, really allowed me, who I have kind of entrepreneurial leanings, he allowed me to be an entrepreneur in his company and take risks and take chances. And, you know, that's what we've done for the last 15 years, really. I mean, we started in original entertainment about 10 years ago. Our first show we sold was Welcome to Sweetie Pies, which is a docu-series following the folks at Sweetie Pies. Second show we sold was Fast and Loud, which had a nice long run on Discovery. And since then, I think we sold 34 shows to major cable networks out of the Midwest, which, you know, I'm very proud of. I had the opportunity to produce a feature film at the end of 2017 called The Ghost Who Walks, which you can watch on Netflix right now. It was all shot here in St. Louis. I raised the money. It was the first time I'd ever done that for a feature film project, but it was all as St. Louis investors. And I'm currently finishing up a documentary on Walt Disney's involvement in the 1960 Winter Olympic Games in Squaw Valley. So we've always got a little something going on. I mean, there's content is needed now more than ever. I would say when we hire people, I'm a little bit more in Gary's camp where, you know, those folks that can do a lot of different things or have more value to us. However, I understand Brandon and Carl and even Connor's needs for having kind of specialists in those industries to be able to kind of drill down and be a really marketable asset with a very particular set of skills. So I totally get that. But, you know, for us, you know, it's rare that I don't hire somebody who's, you know, very good at a lot of different things. I mean, we hire a lot of Jose Oquendos for those that understand the Cardinals reference. But yeah, the networking is huge. The personal brand building is huge. You know, one thing that I always encourage people to do is taking the notion of informational interviews. You know, you can get time with people right now, especially in Zoom, as Carl mentioned. You know, you can get face-to-face time to where if it's an informational interview, what that is for those that don't know is it's you going and talking to a company that you think you might want to work for, but you're not pushing them to hire you at all. It's really more a chance for you to interview them, but also them to learn a little bit about you and learn a bit about the industry. And you'd be surprised at how many people would take those types of meetings. And I think that's important because there's a lot of really great places you can work here in St. Louis in this market, but all across the country. And if you're going to kind of chart your career path, I think it's really important to make sure you're going to land at a place that you think you like and an industry you'll want to like. And to do that kind of research in advance, you can get a lot of that information in an informational interview. But I can't remember who said LinkedIn, maybe Brandon or Carl, it was Carl. I'm a big believer in LinkedIn, man. Your personal brand building is something that starts right now. You know, the first thing I'm going to do if I hire someone, I'm going to see what their portfolio looks like. I'm going to see what kind of organizations they've been in, what kind of skills they've got in the toolbox, and what they've made more than anything. I mean, I think everybody here is a maker in some degree, and it's never been easier to make something now. I mean, you can shoot a movie on one of these things right now, you know, and you couldn't do that back in 94, 95. When I left LA, YouTube and Netflix didn't even exist. So the game's changed and everybody can make something really beautiful. And it's funny because I meet a lot of people that want to be directors and I ask them, what have they made? If they haven't made anything, I question whether they really want to be a director. Or if they haven't written anything and they want to be a writer, you gotta be writing every day. I mean, every morning you should wake up at 6 a.m. and start writing something. So anyway, I get a little long-winded when we have these things, but I'll try to tie it up.
because you are talking to a guy who specialized in Flash gaming, which, if you've been following the news, as of I think like end of this year, Flash is officially dead and is going to be uninstalled from all of your computers, whether you want it to be or not. And that was my bread and butter. But the fact is that through learning everything about Flash, I got my first jobs. And it's about getting your foot in the door here. It is not necessarily about building that larger career path, because you'll get there and you will learn that more generalized set of tools that you need to. And the good thing about a school, about going to a school, is it's going to show you a bit of everything. And then from that point, you can start picking and choosing the individual little pieces that really grab your interest, or that you're particularly adept at, and then you can drill into those. You should look for jobs either locally or in the location that you want to live, and gear your work towards that. You never want to go in blind. So when you're trying to figure out what that specialization is, let the jobs dictate to some extent what that is. Let your personal skill set dictate what that is. Of course, eventually you're going to be well-rounded, and you're going to learn more things. But the key is to get that first job. And that first job is the hardest thing to get, that first foot in the door. And once you've done that, then it begins to open up. So when I say specialize, I don't mean specialize, with the disregard of having a greater base to pull from. It's purely for that first step into the industry. And once you've got that step in the industry, you're going to find that every subsequent job is going to be that much easier to get.
Building off of what Booker just said, I may have misspoke a little bit, right? Absolutely specialize as a student going into coming out of being a student and going into the working world, because you need to identify what you're good at and what the market wants. And that should be how, like Booker said, how you should determine what you specialize in. But while you're specialized in that skill, you should always, it doesn't matter if people think you're the best at what you do, you should always be building up your skill set across the board. And so these unicorns that I mentioned earlier, I was specifically talking about, fresh out of college or fresh out of school, you might find one or two that are fully well-rounded. Other times you have to mix and match and find out what that key ability is. And definitely do not just rest on your laurels ever and just hyper focus. At all times, it's a balancing act of what are you good at and what does the market want. And you should be building those skills with an eye toward the future, even while you're working as a Flash game developer, to say, hey, Apple's starting to talk a lot about Flash. Let me move on over to something that's in a congruent area that I already do and that most of my skills directly apply to, but I can grow that while I'm focused on the skill that I'm currently employed at as.
That's 100%, Carl. I mean, always be learning. I mean, last week I was on a job and learned something new, and I think the minute you stop learning, it might be time to switch jobs, to be honest. But to add on to other ways to get opportunities, it doesn't have to be just a full-time job either. I mean, I hired plenty of people freelance that was how I started, was just freelancing out as a production assistant. And, there's certainly some uncertainties with that. It depends on what market you're into. If you go out to a market like LA, where, outside of COVID, there's a lot of opportunity. Normally there's a lot of shooting going on. You could get on a job, and if that crew that you get on with likes you, they're going to go to the next job and they'll probably drag you along. And, you can be working the rest of the year and turning down work. You give up a few things doing the freelance life, but that's a way to start building that network, building your skills up, just building your set awareness. I mean, there's certain things that you can't learn in college. I always talk about the art of being a commercial artist. I mean, the skill that most of my guys have as editors, motion designers, and animators that are in edit suites is sort of the ability to be a psychologist. I mean, it's not their artistic skills or their technical skills with the machines. It's their ability to be able to turn around and take potentially a bad idea coming from behind them on the couch, again, not with COVID, and say, hey, look, I like that. What if we did this because we only got 20 more hours to work on this project, you know? And that's just something you learn with experience. But freelance opportunities is certainly a way to get in there. And I'm sure there's contract opportunities in Booker's world and in Carl's world too. Maybe in Gary's world too.
Okay. I'm going to bounce off of another question, which is going into a direction that we'd already intended to go. Olivia Fitzgerald mentions you talk about a lot about networking and getting to know people. What's the best way to go about that in a virtual COVID world? And to tack on to that, I mean, just normally, folks face challenges networking in social in social arenas. Do you have tips on this? And I think sometimes it's helpful to outline what are terrible practices. You know, let us know what not to do, because sometimes, you know, frankly, people just don't know. How are we networking now? And how do professional organizations play into that in your individual areas?
I'd love to comment on this one. Just an example for me, I started off before I even got any jobs doing anything in the gaming industry. I just worked on mods for Call of Duty games. And there was a community based around that. And, you know, a bunch of people were involved with that group. And some were devs from the companies themselves that work on the tools there. So submitting work into that field, you know, helped devs see my work from, you know, an internal space instead of me having to reach out to them directly. Of course, reaching out to people directly is always, you know, the number one best way to go. And of course, if somebody doesn't respond to you, don't pester them. Don't keep hounding them with questions, you know, move on to the next person. Because the last thing you want to do is, you know, build up a negative energy with anybody. And then they're not going to want to reach out to you ever again. So for me, networking, especially now, is you know, always reach out to anybody you can, and don't be afraid of just, you know, getting your work rejected or saying it's not good. There's thousands of people who are going to review your stuff over time. You have to be really good at taking you know, feedback with your stuff. You know, if somebody says your stuff isn't good, you know, don't worry about it. Just use that as reinforcement to work on your stuff more. My best advice, at least for what I did, is being involved with as many groups as you possibly can, and always remembering that anything that you do online, and I'm sure everybody knows this in here, everything's recorded. Everything can be looked up, and the way you show off yourself online will represent you as a whole. And anybody who's looking at you will look at those social media outlets and will pull what they think you are from the information that you present on there. So starting early, especially in college, is always present yourself as if you're trying to get a job right now. Even though you're still in college, act as if you are that professional working towards that goal, because that's going to start you off with a better footnote. And there are, you know, less things to look back on and saying, you know, I wish I hadn't presented myself that way. I've seen many people online present themselves in a very negative way when it comes to feedback or literally anything. And I see that, I'm like, I wouldn't want to work with that person. And that instantly turns me off from anything networking wise with them. So just always be aware of your online presence, especially now in COVID, is more important than ever. And so always be friendly with the people you talk to, even if, you know, somebody's reaching out for feedback for anything. Always be open to new ideas when it comes to contacting people or discussing any ideas with anybody. So.
To build off of what Connor just said, another thing you can do in this COVID environment is, you know, sometimes you can cold contact people and you'll get whatever kind of response from that. But if you're always posting and you showing your portfolio off, and when people research, hey, who is this person randomly commenting? If you're adding value to communities that they either are sourcing vendors or contractors from, and or that their direct audience or buyers are built off of. There's a lot of artists, for instance, who may not technically be as skilled as some of the lesser known artists, but they have a little bit of a name in these niche communities, and so they have more of a appeal to certain companies. So the more that you can add value to certain niche communities and for communities that companies and groups are looking for, it can really help you when you reach out to people cold or even through an intro for that networking piece.
Something that I think, you've all heard, I think we've all said that, reach out to working professionals for feedback and stuff like that. It hit me last week, actually, that I think there's something that I'm going to start preaching going forward also, too, is, not necessarily contacting, the working professional people, but also reach out to your peers. At other schools, especially in the journalism world. I mean, there are some really good journalism schools out there. Western Kentucky, Webster's up and coming. There's the University of Missouri. There's tons of them out there, and I think Instagram has kind of bridged that gap a little bit, where you can actually see what some of these other students are doing as far as like the work they're producing. But I think it would be good to actually hear from your peers what they're doing and what they're working on and how they're going about it. It just hit me last week, and I think that's something that I think going forward I'm going to start actually preaching a little bit too, as well as just making sure that you are networking with your peers because they're actually on their boots on the ground at other universities around the country, and I think you guys could share some things there to see what they're doing, and as they can see what you're doing, and sharing ideas back and forth that way as well.
Okay. Anyone else? All right. I really like the way you boiled that down, Carl. The add value to the art, or add value. A lot of organizations that I'm a part of are very, I mean, if you think about what you're doing is adding to the collective greatness of whatever you're practicing, is a really good thing, a really good jumping off point. Let's talk a bit about the interview at this point. I mean, the interview, and also to tack on, actually, probably portfolio is what there's a lot. It seems to be a lot of questions about that as well. But talk to either good and bad practices to the job interview. What are you looking for portfolio, like even within that interview or before? I mean, granted, you'll probably look at the portfolio before you take the interview. Yeah, let's start with that.
I'll start off another one real quick. So portfolio wise, know the company that you're interviewing for. Look at the products that they're producing. When I was applying to Naughty Dog, looking at their types of games that they make, and reflecting probably the best presentation in my portfolio that I will send to them to help them better see that I can do the job that they are wanting. So that means, like, if you have a ton of pieces in your portfolio, right, you can have an art station, your own personal website, you should have all of those things. And if you don't, you should probably start developing those as soon as possible. But so when submitting your portfolio to those specific types of jobs, look at the products and say, okay, does my work reflect this type of atmosphere and this type of design flow, or whatever you're going to be applying for? And then organize your submission to fit that criteria. And another big thing is that, you can have 1,000 pieces in your portfolio. The recruiters are probably going to only look at the first 5. They're not going to sift through everything, and they're going to look at the first ones you put, and they're going to be like, all right, they put this one first. That's probably their best work. So boil it down to, maybe 5 out of the many that you have. And that's what will represent you as a whole. And yeah, I think the big thing is, like, I do a lot of realistic level design rendering. So for me, trying to apply somewhere that does a lot of stylistic, types of designs probably wouldn't be the best fit for me. Not that I can't do that, but if I really wanted to apply for those specific jobs, I would try to build some portfolio pieces that help represent that company's, what they're looking for, just to help me, get a better view of what they're doing.
So a quick follow-up, but also this follow-up should apply to all the other questions. I've heard a spectrum of answers. I'll name Blizzard Entertainment as a company that wants exactly what they do, no matter what. We don't care about anything else, to Pixar, who's told me, we would like to see originality. We already have the people who know how to do what you see on the screen. So, I mean, I'll give you a quick chance to respond to this, Connor. Do you throw a bit of originality into the flavor of those first 5 pieces? Or do you stick to what well, I guess this also could fall into just research the company and find that out. But I want to throw the originality element into this conversation as well.
Of course, like always, when companies are looking for somebody, they're not looking for, for somebody who's going to keep their company at the same line. They're looking for somebody who's going to improve on what they already have. So obviously, when I'm saying research the company and know their product, be familiar with their style, and have some of that style reflect in your portfolio. But you're going to want your own personality to show through your portfolio pieces, and something that'll catch the eye of the recruiter, saying, "Oh, like, oh, this is it's similar to what we have here, but look." This person, they're going in a completely maybe new direction that we might want to explore. We know they're capable of doing the work here, but they also can show that they can add something new to the table. So for me, it was I always loved the Call of Duty games, working on the zombie maps and stuff and like that. And for me, I always was critique them constantly while I play them. I'm like, I wish they would have done this here, and this works so much better here. So I would, for me, I would design those maps in, to keep the idea of what the zombies game mode was, but I would take it to a whole nother level of what I thought would make it better. And whether, the companies would see that as a positive thing, that's, I think, what we were talking about earlier is, taking some small risks in that sense is, just doing something a little bit outside of the box and making the company see that, oh, they can definitely bring something new to us, and we want to have some uniqueness with that. So
I could jump in real quick because I don't know much about the internal structures of some of the other businesses here, but I would be willing to bet that they're similar to ours, and that the creative business in general is a collaborative business. And so every business has probably got kind of its own vibe or flavor that you walk into, and you're not gonna be able to see that on a website, but hopefully, you start to get, if you do enough research, you might be able to get just a little bit of a gist on the voice and kind of what they do and how they operate. Because at the end of the day, anybody I hire is not going to go work off in some bay by themselves. They're going to be working with everybody else in the team. So more often than not, I mean, I'm hiring attitude over aptitude. I got to make sure that that person that we hire is going to be a good fit with our existing team, because I've tried it the other way. I've hired people that have got just brilliant work on a portfolio, but if they can't work with others, or they don't have the ability to work with a client, or this beautiful thing that they made took them 6 months to make, I need to know what they can do in 6 days. And so I think just being very collaborative and in an open and showing that side, that those are all intangibles that aren't on LinkedIn, that aren't on a resume. Those are things that's the only opportunity you get is in that interview. And you got to show that you're a team player, and there's kind of a running joke around our office. We can always tell the people who played team sports and who didn't, and it shows, I mean, again, I'm not necessarily looking for athletes per se, but, everybody's got to contribute. One person can't do their job unless somebody else has done their part of the job. And that's just, that's the nature of any creative project that goes through our shop.
The world of multimedia journalism, your portfolio is the hook for me as an editor. It's either I'm going to take another look and call you, or I'm going to throw it into another pile. So you need to make sure that your portfolio reflects the company that you're trying to go to work for. If you know that newspapers, deal with people, and we work in moments, and we capture, scenes and moments and stuff like that. I don't really want to see a whole bunch of photos of like tractors with weeds growing out of them and buildings and, and stuff like that. That's not going to do you or me any good. So, you just need to do your research on what it is that you're looking for. And if your portfolio is not up to that, then you just need to keep working on it. And then when it is, then send it in. But again, I think just knowing the company, if it's video, it's the same thing. You just have to kind of know that company and know what it is that they're looking for, and make sure that your portfolio reflects that, because that's my first initial look into you. And if I like what I see, then we're gonna talk.
Another small point in addition to like everything was right on point, especially about tailoring it toward the company you're going to. Another way you should tailor it is if we're looking for a writer or a storyboard artist or a character designer or any particular role, you should have that material up front, because if we're looking for a storyboard artist and you have all, portraits and things like that, it doesn't really apply. And like Gary said, it'll be in the trash. So that needs to be up front. And if you don't have that type of material, you really need to spend some time and create that, especially if that's what people want. Additionally, you're going to be potentially competing against people that they're trying to get this job too. So it's a little bit of a competition. So make sure that you're comparing your portfolio samples and you're building your eye for quality, because you need to compare yourself against the market, just like the buyers and the recruiters and hirers are going to. So just make sure that the pieces speak to who you are. If you have a specific kind of, like Connor was mentioned, if you have some kind of special sauce or something that's unique to you, you need to have it on Front Street, because oftentimes you won't get to explain it if your portfolio doesn't represent the real you.
That's a great point, Carl. We're not going to do the work to find the pieces that we're looking for in your reel. And, for me, I get director of photography reels, motion designer reels, editor reels. I talked to a lot of ad agencies too, and Christopher, back to your point, I know there's agencies here in town. If you're looking to be a copywriter, the general thing is to like, well, I got to put a radio spot, I got to put a TV spot. More often than not, they're looking for a bigger just idea, not just like the end deliverable of what that idea was. They're not looking for a 30-second TV spot. They want to see something that had this big idea that hasn't been done. It had these many extensions, so they want to see the thinking. If you want to be a writer, if you want to be an art director, then you better have mad Photoshop skills and design skills. And same thing, it's got to, what Carl just said, it's got to show off your unique point of view. And, I think you can do that with any piece of work, honestly. I mean, whether it's for gaming or art direction or copywriting or shooting or editing or whatever, there's going to be something you do really well. So have that be at the forefront, but, don't have the person watching it have to search through a variety of pieces to find exactly what they're looking for in that particular moment. And it is a little more work, I understand, but it's okay to have 3 or 4 reels on the standby. That's just the reality of it.
I'll be quick because I don't have a whole lot to add. I'm a game programmer, so there's really no such thing as a portfolio, because my portfolio would be a lot of text, which nobody is going to really understand or take the time to try to make sense of. In my world, you're tested. When I go into a job interview, I sometimes am sat in front of a bunch of experts and they tell me to write code on a whiteboard, which is probably the most nerve-wracking, painful thing you can possibly imagine. And sometimes there's an actual test that you take at a computer, and that's the entry point. But what everybody has said is still true of this, and it's true in the art fields that I've been part of. We recently hired an artist. This was her very first job coming out of college, was to work with us, and we only have 6, 7 artists. And we hired her because she spent an entire week in a casino, and she was interviewing patrons, and she was asking them the types of things that they liked in their games. And she went and she did the research to find out a slot machine title that wasn't taken, and she designed an entire slot machine. And when she applied, she didn't give us a stock portfolio with all of the work that she did from school. She gave us a slot machine, and instantly she was hired. As long as we could establish that she was somebody who, was personable and that we could work with, she got that job because she showed genuine interest in our particular field and in our particular job. And I don't think there's anything you could do that would put you more in the right position with a company than something like that. So that's it.
Okay. I would like to now, since the questions are really piling up, and we have I think we have about a half an hour left. There's about 20 questions. I'd like to really get into some in-depth things. And oh, it looks like people are answering questions as well. I was going to ask Connor the question, but he just answered. So let's jump into that, and this can be anybody jumps in on the questions or all, depending on who'd like to, or because not all questions will apply to all. But here's I want to ask a question. Just want to ask if there are opportunities for media students to end up as actors. Paradoxically, not just create, but participate in a process. That could apply to several. Who'd like that one?
Can you repeat that question again? I'm sorry. I saw it in the Q&A here. I guess I could read it for myself. I'm typing an answer to another one though. So
the anonymous attendee just wants to know if there are opportunities for media students to end up as actors, not just create, but participate in a process. So behind the camera to in front of the camera.
I can take a quick stab at that one if you want. So I have plenty of actors that come onto our shoots as production assistants, because you know, the other thing that gets tough to teach in class in like a real world environment is just sort of set etiquette, you know, where you're supposed to be, where you're not supposed to be, especially now with COVID. And, you know, our production world's changed for better or worse, and for at least the next year and a half. And so anytime you can be on a set, especially bigger sets where there's a lot of moving pieces, or a lot of departments and departmental heads, and you know, things are moving at a fast clip, you know, as an actor, you got to come in kind of with all the barrels in the chamber, because, you know, if we're waiting on you and you're flubbing lines, that's bad. But as a PA, you get to kind of watch that and watch others do it. You know, going into assisting casting directors, I think is another way. There's always assistance needed in the casting process. And you get a chance to see how others are reading for parts and how you might read for parts. So, and then the other thing too, is, you know, I mean, we live in this world right now, in the selfie world. There's been plenty of people that become just kind of on camera personalities just from the social brands that they built, and their own personal brands. And so we've hired a lot of people like that, just that have, you know, been on camera talent, and then we've allowed them to come to the other side of the camera and either to direct or direct themselves. And so I think those worlds are just getting blurred, I guess, is kind of the message I'm trying to say. And it's really because of the amount of platforms that are out there where an actor could get their voice heard and their space heard and the performance heard.
And I was gonna piggyback off that a little bit. It's especially also at least in the AAA industry, because we have actors, you know, who play out the roles of our characters, and we have like mocap stages, who, you know, voice acting and everything's with that, and you know, all the production people and animators, even design goes to those shoots to make sure that the full vision of what was you know, put forth first is going to be made. So everybody is going to have that experience of, you know, being alongside that and seeing what that process is like. So of course you're in there with the writers, you know, the top dogs of all of the company in there, making sure that vision is being fulfilled. So just being in that space, I think is your best ticket in, even if you're just a production assistant, not just going on to be an actor.
Folks, we've got a few questions talking about failure, preparing yourself for rejection, and maybe some of those experiences that you've had, advice you might have about how to prepare yourself for rejection, and then how to move on from that. What did you learn? Some preparation to handle that kind of experience.
You know, there is a totally different view of failure and rejection nowadays that I'm seeing is more common, and it's producing a lot stronger talents. You need to look at failure and rejection as a necessary part of the experience, and also a necessary part of your growth. Because without failure, you won't get the critique that you need to focus on the places that you're weak. Without rejection, you won't know what that company is looking for in a hire. So again, you know, it's become cliche now, but you need to fail fast and fail often. But it's really one of the most important parts of growth. And if you're scared of failure, you'll be scared to have an interview. You'll be scared to kind of take that next leap and try something different or try to grow your skills in areas that you don't currently have. So it's very important to get rejected. It's very important to fail, and you should go in expecting that and expecting to grow from it.
That's when you don't grow from it. That's the problem. And somebody, as somebody runs a business, the last thing I want is for our failures to be in kind of public eye or in front of clients, but sometimes it just has to happen, and what you do is you see how those people respond, and to Carl's point, they either grow from it or they don't, so, and if you don't, and you can't take that kind of constructive criticism and learn from it, then it's going to be a long road. But failure is critical. I mean, I've failed more times than I care to count, but it's always made me better. It's prepared me for where I am now, and I foresee it continuing to do that.
We all put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be the best, and that if you fail at something doesn't mean you're not not on the right path. Like just and simply, if you don't, you should learn from that, and that'll make you better too. So.
I see this trend nowadays that everybody, even just in high school and early college, thinks that if they're not anywhere, at the top already, that they think they've failed completely in life, which is totally untrue. It's a long process sometimes, and sometimes along the way you'll get lucky with certain opportunities, but you can never hope for that to happen. I once a while back applied for a job that I was not at all qualified for, but I was like, I'll just see if I can do it. And I completely bombed the interview. None of the questions I asked, I had no correct answers for that. And I walked away from that interview going like, oh, this sucks. Like, I can't believe I did that. But I learned so much from that interview, and I knew what to prepare for in the future for those types of roles. I knew what was going to be expected of me, later on. So it gave me time to prepare for that with the jobs that I had now. And I feel like, you can't always tell yourself that if I'm not at the top right now, I can't do anything at all, because it is a process. But you have to try those interviews that you don't think you're ready for. I knew I probably wasn't going to get it, but the experience of having that interview, it was gold to me. And I got so many answers and so much more out of that interview than I expected. After thinking about it for a while, I was like, what, I'm really glad I did that. It kind of sucked during the process, but I'm so much more prepared when I am ready to take, that next big step in that job. So.
What's good about that also, Connor, is there's some students that I've been in that situation with me, and then they come back a year or two later and I see their growth, and that attracts me to them even more because I saw how fast they grew in that time period. So, again, if you're rejected, don't let that be the last time that you apply, because, I think showing your growth is actually a very good thing as well.
Some of the best interviews I ever had were ones that I went into expecting to fail, because there's something freeing about knowing you're not going to get the job, and there's something good that does something to your psyche where you're like, it's okay. I'm going to go in. I'm going to learn. I'm going to talk to these people. I'm going to learn about their process. I'm going to learn about this company, and I'm just going to see where it goes. And you can read that off of somebody. And if you come into that position to try and get a job, and you're relaxed because you don't ultimately care about the income, or at least you're exuding that presence, whether or not you're freaking out inside, that's really going to help you in a surprising way. And everything that Connor said, 100%.
I think we have an interesting question here about, do you view yourself as a perfectionist? So all of you have shared your journey. You've had many different experiences that have brought you to this moment in your careers. We're talking about preparation and networking, portfolio building, being open, accepting failure and fears. But how are you navigating, or did you early in your career? How are you navigating now? Your own personal personality and a tendency for perfectionism in your current careers?
So I think being a perfectionist, I would like to consider myself sometimes, yes. It's healthy and unhealthy. It's gotten me a lot farther, a lot quicker, but at what cost, right? At what health costs? And sometimes it's very difficult to find a balance between how much should I work and how much should I, not work. Not working is very important. And it took me a very long time to realize that. Taking breaks and realizing, this is the end of the day, I should stop. Because at the end of the day, if you work too long, you're going to burn yourself out for the rest of the week, and then you can't do anything at all. I think developing a healthy schedule, time management, everything they teach you throughout, grade school of saying like, you should, learn all these basic things that you should do. And I think we forget about all those things as we're really striving. We're like, I really want to get this job. I have to do everything I possibly can to do this. And sometimes it's best to take a step back and, take a look at it on a bigger picture and be like, okay, maybe it's best for me to, manage myself almost and kind of see where I need to go and what's healthy for me. And I think, having the mindset of a perfectionist, but being self-aware of it, it's always good to strive to always improve on what you're doing. I never, sometimes I sit back at my work and I'm like, oh, this is really good, but I can make it better. And there's projects I've worked on for a very long time where I actually see my own iterations. I've worked on a project for 3 years and I go back to a certain area and I'm like, oh, that looks like trash. Like I have to go redo that. And sometimes you just have to figure out a best way to cut it off, say it's good enough, and push a product out or push, a version of that out. And I think developing your own internal schedule for that will help you in the long run for sure.
I was going to say the same thing too. I think for me, it's like I do consider myself a perfectionist, but I know when to cut it off, so it doesn't like get the best of me, because that's even worse. So, and then the other thing for me is like, I try to use other parts of my brain, on those 2 days that I'm off or whatever the situation is, just to kind of decompartmentalize away from what it is I'm doing, and for me, that's very helpful. So.
I was going to build off of what Connor and Gary just said. Everybody, I don't think you ever stop being a perfectionist or wanting your project to be better and better and better and better. A deadline helps everything, because if you have to make a deadline, you have to ship. And if you don't ship, it's over. So if you don't have deadlines, there's people right now that are the best in their field, and you have famous artists and famous animators, famous writers who they work for a company on a project and they ship gold and ship beautiful work constantly. But then they have this magnum opus that they're working on for themselves, and they've been working on it for 20 or 30 years. And they aren't even able to see a lot of the issues that they're introducing, because they're so committed to it. And like, this baby will be so beautiful when it's birthed. It will also be 40 when it's birthed. So you got to get the baby out eventually. And I'm not going to continue this metaphor because it can get pretty complicated.
Yeah, Carl nailed it. I'm in a deadline-driven business. So I learned long ago, while everybody that I hire probably is a perfectionist at heart, they also know that they have to do the best they can with the time that we have and the money that we have. And, if we don't do that, we don't get that opportunity again. And if you want to keep doing this and getting good opportunities, you have to be able to deliver at a high level. And you also have to deliver on time. And you also have to deliver a lot of times with clients who may or may not be giving you ideas that are making it better, or more often than not making it worse. There's a reason there are director's cuts to commercials. And again, no disrespect to any of my clients. I'm fortunate to work with a lot that do have great ideas, but there's some that are out there that don't, and they just, they have their reasons. And sometimes it's not even, they're doing, it's, they know their brand better than we ever will. And it's like, if that's not in there, then it's not going to, check off that box for a brand. But Deadlines are critical. And I think that's the other thing too, that is probably really tricky to learn in college, is just working in a deadline driven business. It goes back to that commercial artist world. And the sooner you can understand that and show that and say, hey, I created this piece, but I also created it under these time constraints. I think that goes a long way, and probably with everybody's field on here, to be able to know that you can deliver something on time, on budget, and at a high level of production value.
I think there's also something to speak about deadlines, is that, you have this looming deadline, you know your tasks, and being able to have a proper scope for everything is very important. Every project I've ever been on has been overscoped completely from the beginning, and that's what happens, right? Your creative freedom like runs wild, and you're like, okay, we want to do all this, we want to do this, we want to do that, and as the months start to tick by, you say, okay, what's realistic? What can we do with scope? And when it gets to those deadlines, it's very difficult, but you have to be okay with cutting things, and you have to be okay with saying, okay, the project's going to be better if we don't do this piece, and we focus the rest of our energy on this as a whole, and this will be our product. I've had to cut things sometimes I've worked on for months, but in respect of the project as a whole, it works better. And yet you just have to know your time constraints for that. And, it's impossible to guess every step of the way what's going to happen and lay out your complete roadmap of stuff. And every project that you're on, you'll learn a bit more, but there's always new challenges with that. So just being respectful to the idea of the time you have, and the idea of cutting stuff, and knowing it's probably not going to be completely what you envisioned it at first, will go a long way.
So I found a question that I think is interesting in terms of, well, with COVID, it might not be as, well, what are some tips for establishing yourself in a new city with previously established contacts in the city that you're moving from? A few of you have moved around a bit. So what is your tactic when going somewhere?
I'll jump in. Join a Facebook group for whatever your field is. There will be one. If find whatever the closest largest city is, and look in that city's Facebook page for anything related to your field, and join those groups. You probably won't go get to meet these people in meetings right now, but maybe they have Discords, maybe they have chat groups. Get to know these people and get to know that community. That's really the biggest key. If you're going in blind, that's the easiest way to get names. Once you've got names, you can build contacts, and then you can go from there.
I guess I'll jump in real quick. So I moved out here to Los Angeles from St. Louis. Every person I've ever known, my family, my friends, are on the opposite side of the country. So I didn't know anybody out here moving, and it's of course it's definitely different with COVID. But just exploring the area around, or and knowing what's around you, and like just what Booker said with groups and stuff, what's going on. If people know you're in the same area and have similar interests, they're going to want to connect with you, and those groups are built specifically for that, finding new people who have the same interests. And you never know who you're going to find in those groups at all. I joined a longboarding group out here. Of course, COVID, it's not going to be the same, but there was a guy in media in a longboarding group out here who knew people in other parts of the industry. I didn't go into that part, but now I know people in a field I wouldn't have even guessed that would have come out of that group. So just connecting with things you're interested in, not just specifically the ones that you're trying to get a job for, can also connect you with anything, really.
I can jump in here real quick. So I moved to Houston, and then I moved to Los Angeles, and Los Angeles in particular, I treated it like a game, to be a little bit honest. Yeah. I drew a triangle of between Burbank, Hollywood, Culver City, Santa Monica. Actually, it was more like a rhombus or a rectangle or something like that. But I knew I wanted to generally be in that area because that's where most of the places I wanted to work were, and it's a very tight-knit community. And so I just made it a point to just, concentrate all my efforts in that general area from a geographical standpoint. Now, I didn't, when I went out there, it was a long time ago, but I befriended people, and I would go to their college alumni functions. I went to a bunch of Stanford alumni events. And I didn't go to Stanford, but my buddy did, and I was just +1. And I actually made some great contacts that way. You know, I just made it a game. I just tried to connect with as many people as I possibly could. And, you know, I think I'll say this, and I may get in a little trouble for saying it, you know, growing up in the Midwest and being from the Midwest helped me tremendously when I was out in a place like Los Angeles, because I always felt like I had this built-in bullshit detector, you know. And you know, the one thing that you can run into in Southern California in particular, it's not as prevalent in other markets, but you know, there's a lot of people out there just for the wrong reasons, you know. And so you don't want to waste time networking with people that aren't really going to have good interests at heart, or, you know, genuine desire to do well. You know, those are going to be people that are serving Pete's Coffee at Pete's Coffee 10 years from now. You know, so I actually had this ability, this innate ability to be able to say, that guy's full of shit, or this person, I'm not wasting time with them. And I just cut bait and I'd move on, you know. And again, it's a big town, but it's a small town once you get out there. You know, I mean, I think once you start to get into the swimming pool that is the entertainment industry, there's just there's different verticals, from TV to film to commercial to music videos. And, you know, they're all sort of interrelated country clubs, but, you know, once you get into one of them, I mean, the world is actually not that big. And I was kind of shocked by the time I left how much closer I'd actually gotten to kind of that inner circle of Hollywood by the time I left. And honestly, had I been out there 2 years sooner than I had been, I'd probably still be out there and would be talking to you guys today. I just got out there a little late. I met my wife to be, and the clock was ticking on starting a family. So anyway, I was fortunate to be able to do what I'm doing now here in St. Louis.
No, I definitely relate to David's story. It's pretty much the same. I went out there, and because I was getting into animation, it was a little easier, I guess. But well, it was easier for me because I was already a part of communities, and LA is like the place where it's done, right? So when I got out there, Steven Silver is a popular character artist. He would meet at the Costco at lunches. He'd get off from Nickelodeon, walk down to the Costco, and he would say, "Hey, I'm going to the Costco. Who wants to hang out and draw?" So I went there. There were parties and events, like even like the people I wanted to work for, they would have like, oh, Nickelodeon's having a showcase of their new shows on the Nickelodeon Live. So at any opportunity, I would see anything related to the field, and I would be there, and I would give it FaceTime. And you know, sometimes conferences, if there's conferences specific to that industry, get up and ask a question and introduce yourself and say something interesting, and people will come up to you and start talking, or you can go to them and begin talking. But definitely giving FaceTime across the board. If you're entering a new industry, like David said before, you can come in as a PA and be in the places you need to be to meet the right people. So just try to get into those places and give it FaceTime. And if you can identify the companies, you know, everybody wants to work at Riot Games and things like that. How do you get around those folks, and how do you know where they're going to be? You can go to any of their social media pages and stalk them and see where they'll be next, and you can just happen to be there and say hi.
Good. I'm going to serve up another question. How would you recommend a woman to market herself and build those important connections? Unfortunately, we live in a world where assertive women are seen very differently than assertive men.
Well, I'll take some information about that. I would say a lot of companies out here, especially like either, I can only speak necessarily for the gaming industry out here, but you know, whether you're an assertive woman, people are going to be looking for the, you know, that personality to do everything that it takes to do that job. So I wouldn't take that as something that would hold you down from applying anywhere, especially, you know, I mean, it could be different in any parts of the US, but out here in Los Angeles, people are looking for the talent and the personality to do those tasks. So I would still apply anywhere you can to do that job. And the people who are going to want to hire you out here or anywhere else are going to take an interview with you.
I can add on to that. I mean, for me, I don't know that it matters gender, race, anything. From my standpoint, if you can use both sides of your brain, again, the specialist may use one side of the brain in more of a creative aspect, but my job is I'm straddling numbers and I'm straddling creative. I'm not the smartest guy in the room. I'm not the most creative guy in the room, but people that can straddle both sides of the brain and do it well and do it on time and on budget will be working. And it doesn't matter what it is you're making. And then it just comes back to the things that we've all talked about, building those relationships, having somebody give you a chance and an opportunity, and you got to be friendly, you got to be cordial, but at the same time, they got to know that if you're put into the fire, you're going to deliver. And if you can do that, I think anybody could do it.
Kind of this inherent bias is a real thing. And, it's really hard to overcome it, right? You can try to assimilate into what people expect of that role or what people expect of you as a woman or as a minority or anything else. Or you can buck the system and be totally a rebel against what everything is. But ultimately, what I've found is that if you, and unfortunately, this is unfortunate at times, but you just have to be one of the best in the room at the time. So again, you need that FaceTime and you need to get in and you need to be friends with people that are in that industry and everything. But to get past some of these biases, you have to sometimes go above and beyond, and it's unfortunate, but it's a fact of the matter right now. And as there are more women in game design and more women into IT and more women into animation and things of that nature, it'll be a little easier. But when you're trying to break ground, you have to have the strength to break through, and it's going to be difficult. And what you're signing up to is a difficult task. So you definitely have to know that going into it, what you're signing yourself up for, because that bias does not stop. For instance, I mentioned that we won an Academy Award, right? That has not given us anything free. We have had to go in and then we get questioned, can you produce? Can we produce? You see all the things we're producing, Can you deliver? Well, we just delivered this. We just delivered this. We just delivered this. What do you want to see? So you will always face those biases, and you need to kind of understand that from the beginning. We talked about rejection and everything. Go in expecting the worst and prepare for it. And unfortunately, it's going to be tough. But if you want to break ground, you have to be the best in the room at times. It's very hard, and it's an unfortunate answer. And so if you're not confident in your abilities and everything, like everyone isn't, it becomes even harder. So you just have to really work on your skills and be confident in the fact that what you're bringing to an equation or what the solution that you're bringing is the best one. So it's very unfortunate, and it's not an answer that's like, hey, just go do it and people will love you, because that's not always the case. In the case of, I think most people that I know, they have the best intention, and these biases never come to the forefront. But even myself, in my mind, I'm like, I've never seen this type of person doing that job, So can they even do it, right? So you have to understand the society builds these preconditions, and if you want to break through them, you have to you're really taking on a lot, and it has to happen. And so more power to you for taking on that trek, but it's going to be a tough journey, and you have to constantly improve and be dedicated to it.
Yeah, I'd add one more thing. We talked about this earlier, but the creative business is a collaborative business, and so there's going to be, certainly in the creative industry, a lot of people that have very strong opinions and viewpoints and perspectives, and that's great. You want those people, but at the same time, they also have to be able to collaborate. There's very few people in this industry who are allowed to just be a total asshat, for lack of a better word, and still just kind of run the show. David Fincher is an example. Somebody like that can go out there and just be awful to everybody and make whatever he wants. That's not the norm. The norm is like, you get good people in there, you get smart people, and you put them in a team where they're going to collaborate, because again, it's not an individual capacity type job. And if you can embrace that and do some of the things that Carl said and others, and you know, I think there'll be plenty of people that'll look at smart, collaborative, forward-moving people for sure.
So we're at 2:23. We're 3 minutes over our schedule. I would like to ask the panelists if they have any final thoughts. And also, while the final thoughts are going on, we still have some questions in there. If you have answers for our attendees, please type them in. But final thoughts, folks. Who'd like to go?
Well, I'd say whatever industry, whatever job that you're focused on, you have to love it, especially in media, entertainment, gaming. You can't just do it because, you know, you think it pays well or you think it's going to be just fun or enjoyable. You have to love the type of work and the collaborative work that comes with it. There's a lot of other skills that come with these types of jobs that aren't on the surface. I always tell everybody, any students that I've ever talked to, that, you know, my skills as a level designer using Photoshop and Maya and 3D software are great, but I think the most important skill you can have is communication above anything else. You know, you can be the best designer, you can be the best producer in the entire world, but if you can't communicate with anybody, you're not going to get anywhere. And I understand, you know, that's very difficult for some people, and it was difficult for me growing up. I was I didn't want to talk to a lot of people doing a lot of stuff, but I pushed myself to do things that made me uncomfortable, like doing public speaking. I always hated that. You know, doing this even like a couple years ago would have been terrifying for me. I would have been like, oh God, I can't do that. But I've seen myself grow because of those things. I pushed myself into those situations that make, you know, I know I'm gonna, you know, think that it's going to be uncomfortable later, but in the long run, it helps me develop these skills that ultimately push me above anybody else who doesn't do those things. So I would, you know, take classes that not just focus on your major or that job that you're interested in, but take communication classes, take public speaking, do those types of activities that put you on the spot and put you out there as, you know, somebody who wouldn't naturally do that. So that's my greatest takeaway, I think.
I think if I had to do it all over again, I think I would have probably read a hell of a lot more than I've read up to this point in my life. You know, reading and writing both are something I think no matter what field you're in is something that can benefit you. And again, if I could roll this back 35 years, I think I would have been reading a heck of a lot more than what I, especially now, in this industry, the way things are, you know, and you know, especially with the news the way it is today. You know, some people are getting the news from Twitter and Facebook and stuff like that. You got to be able to differentiate, you know, what's real and what's not real, and you know, and go to those sources and you know, figure that stuff out. So yeah, I would say probably the biggest thing I would probably impart to you would be to, regardless of what field you're in, read and write, read and write, read and write.
Yeah, just to add to that, you're never going to stop learning. Your college education is a starting point, and if anything, what you're going to learn from that is the ability to learn. What I went to college for and the skill set that I came out of that is almost useless now, because the industry moves so quickly. But what I did learn was the ability to do the research and be willing to put in the effort and the time to learn the things that I needed to learn to be able to further my career. So just be ready for that, because it's never going to stop. If you want to be successful in this industry or these industries, you can't sit back on your laurels. You got to keep moving forward. So yeah.
I'll piggyback off that just because I think you provided me a nice segue, which I always appreciate. So I'm going to answer another question too. It was over here. Somebody had asked about what book to read. One I would recommend to anybody is Carol Dweck's book, Mindset. It's about open and closed mindsets. There are always going to be hurdles and challenges in any career path that you do. And how you react when those hurdles come about defines what your career is ultimately going to be, you know. And, you know, I've always had this mindset that there's always a way. You know, I went out there as just a total novice to LA, just figuring out, okay, I'm just going to draw this, you know, geometric shape around this part of LA, and that's going to be my plan, you know, and that's how I started. But it sort of worked, you know, and I continued to do that. And so the answers are out there, especially now more than ever, you know. I mean, if you need to find something, you got to be resourceful, because if you're not, somebody else is. And if you're not getting the answer you want, or you're not getting the information about a company you want, I'm sorry, that's BS. It's out there. You can find it. You can look in a variety of places. You can find the answers. And so that resourcefulness, I think, is something that I take pride in that. I mean, we've got kind of a running joke in here. Anytime somebody needs some just random prop or location at our company, they'll send out a company-wide email, and I'm always the guy that ends up finding it, because I'll go and look for it. I consider it a challenge. It's like, that's the thing I'm going to go find. And I think you can do that with a career. It's like, if you want to go work for Pixar, you know, do everything you can to, you know, start connecting with people on LinkedIn that work at Pixar. Find Facebook groups of Pixar workers, or you know, I mean, there's a way. You may not get that job, but that may lead you to a job of a better place that is not Pixar. You just don't know, but you're building your network, and you're finding a way. And don't let hurdles define you, I think, is probably the thing. I've seen too many people just like, oh, well, I can't do this. They didn't like my editorial reel. I guess I'm not going to be an editor. Maybe I'll go be a shooter. It's like, well, you know, you probably weren't meant to be an editor. You know, that's just, those are hurdles. You got to get around them. But that book, Mindset, will, it's done wonders for me. I'm trying to implement it with my kids, and it's considered must read, if you ask me.
All right. Any other closing words?
I was just gonna, I know this has been answered, Booker, you answered that for Dorian. If anybody's open to having contact on LinkedIn outside of this, anybody who sends me their portfolio, I would love to review it. I can't speak for anybody else, but anybody who really wants to get into like just the gaming industry, I'm always interested in finding that stuff. So yeah, feel free to contact me at any time.
All right.
Yeah, I would say the same thing here for us. You know, I'd want to make sure that they're either, you know, you're a director of photography, editor, animation, motion design, color correction artist, long form TV. Those are the types of things. Anything else, probably I'm not going to be able to be much help, but I'm always happy to look at stuff. So thanks for the time.
Okay. I'd like to pass it over to Susan, but I'd thank you so much, everyone. It's always awesome to have a really great conversation with a bunch of really cool folks. Susan?
Well, yes, thank you so much for your time and your perspectives, your expertise. This is really important for our students, and we thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you for everyone's participation, and have a great day.